Hi, this is Ken Adams, and welcome to this edition of City Beat. And this week I'm joined by State Representative Paul Evans from District 20. And congratulations on getting through this session, legislative session.
Thank you for that. Thank you for having me on the show as well.
So one of the things that I know that interested me was that there was money put aside to seismically retrofit the Center Street Bridge, which I think is going to be something that's really needed because it wasn't on the agenda till about 30 years out, and I don't think that was workable. So I was very glad to see that that went through.
Yeah, it is the case with the major pieces of legislation. There were a lot of moving parts, and while I had a few issues with the end product for the package that went before the legislature, I was much more in favor of the 8.3 billion package rather than the 5.3, and I was concerned about the way in which some of the funding aspects ended up at the very last. But throughout most of the session, my priority was getting the Salem Center Street Bridge as an upgrade into the package. It has been my priority since I got elected in 2014. While I certainly understand the arguments and recognize the need someday for a third bridge because of the growth of the community, my most immediate concern has been making sure that when a seismic event occurs, people can get across the river to the hospital that they can see. And I'm old-fashioned. I think that, when it comes to fiscal policy, I'm conservative. I want to take care of what we have first before we look at building. And one way to ensure that we could move it up the target list from 30 years out was to really work very hard with Representative Clem and others in the area to make sure that as they were putting the package list together, the concerns and the safety impacts of not having that intra-community route were recognized and included. So I'm very grateful. It was not an easy thing to do, and I will always truly appreciate the willingness of the Transportation Committee to recognize how the seismic health of important bridges and other types of infrastructure is more important than sometimes people want to think about.
Well, not only that, but maintenance is something that quite often overlooked. You know, when you're building a new road or a new bridge, people don't think about, okay, it only lasts so long, and now it's going to need maintenance, major maintenance. Anyway, whether we're seismically retrofitting it or not, that maintenance goes on forever, as long as you want to have that bridge up. So that's, to me, is something that people quite often forget about when they're budgeting, is how to maintain what you have.
It is, and the the interesting thing about the Center Street Bridge is right now, I'm sure people have noticed, they're actually doing routine maintenance on it, which was scheduled obviously prior to the package being passed by the legislature. But we're looking at a 7-year horizon, so the Center Street Bridge won't be upgraded next year, but within the next 7 years. And the reason that that's an important distinction is we have to be thinking 20, 30, 40 years in the future with what you talked about, the maintenance costs, on our mind, because we've let so much maintenance be deferred for so long. We now have problems that could have been taken care of through regular maintenance really compounding. And that's why, to me, it was critical to get at least one of our bridges in the zone that it needs to be within the next 7 years.
Well, that's something that's been a trend. A lot, not just Oregon, but a lot of states have kind of limited their tax base by putting on limits on, say, property taxes and other forms of revenue. And Oregon doesn't have sales tax.
And we have a artificially constrained property tax system.
So we don't have a lot of excess funds as a result. But Oregon is growing, as you mentioned, but it really creates a lot of conflict then when you do have new development, trying to balance that with making sure you're maintaining with what you do have.
It is, and the fact of the matter is, the frustrating truth about our reality is that this particular budget year, the outlook was relatively good, 6% growth over the next 2 years. But the sunk costs of services with a growing population and a revenue system that has artificial constraints on it we're starting to see truly we're off the map. And what I mean by that is this. In 1990, when Measure 5 first passed, and then later in the mid-90s when Measure 4750 passed, people at the time never imagined that the legislature would end up being the primary funding for K-12 education. So for example, in 1990, about 32% of the general fund budget, plus or minus, went to K-12. This year it was closer to 64%. And what that means is it constrains all the other things you could be doing, all the other maintenance projects you could be doing, all the other state troopers that you could be hiring and sustaining. If you talk to the revenue folks, they say as much as 30% of the budget that we're wrestling with right now in terms of sunk long-term costs, including PERS and some of the other ones that are in the news, we would not be having these conversations if we had a different property tax system. We would not be having these conversations if we had a revenue system that was sustainable. So for a number of years, the legislature and local governments have been doing everything they can to rearrange the deck chairs as best as they possibly can, but we have a growing state. And at some point we're going to have to face the costs of supporting a growing population.
But we did achieve some things in this budget, and I'm glad to see that you were mentioning about K-12.
Mm-hmm.
The education budget seems to be, at least it grew somewhat,
Mm-hmm.
and so that is, I think, a plus.
Yep, I agree.
And what are some of the other things that you were particularly happy about? I know that you quite often sit on vet issues.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so I'm sure that that is something that is very important to our vets here in Oregon.
Yeah, I think this session, when people look back upon it, when people look back upon the 2017 legislative session, I think they're going to say it was a good, if not great, legislative session. And what I mean by that is this. Number one, as you alluded to on the education piece, we were able to fund K-12 education not at the levels that they wanted, but at the levels they needed. Meaning, Salem, Kaiser, and Central School District in House 20, both school districts budgeted for $8.1 billion, and we were able to get it to $8.2. So a little bit extra rather than a cut of what they went through their process with. Again, it's not perfect. They would love more. The quality education model would be closer to $10 billion. So it's not that the work is done. It's that we were able to figure out a way to give them what they need as we figure out how we're going to move forward. We also passed what I believe is a very important health care package that included a lot of different things. The bottom line is 350,000 Oregonians that might lose their health care because of things going on in Congress. And quite frankly, whether or not ACA is repealed, a lot of the insurance markets are so upside down right now because of the uncertainties caused by the conversation about repealing that health care for many people is at risk, and we felt that was important. The transportation package was moved forward. The thing that I'm most proud about, the thing that I'm most grateful for being a part of, however, was, as you also mentioned, the veterans package. In 2016, the voters of Oregon supported a resolution that I was a co-chief sponsor getting it out to the ballot, and it set aside 1.5% of Oregon lottery revenues for veterans outreach and services. It passed with 84% of the public supporting it. Then, because of the budget challenges we had, there were differing plans on how we were going to try to spend that money, whether or not we were going to use some of it to basically supplant general fund monies and other things. At the end of the day, this legislature was able to do a couple of things. Number one, the general fund budget, the level of the general fund investments in veterans care was not supplanted. It didn't all go the same way, and it was in different agencies to do different things for veterans, but we kept faith with not supplanting the purchase power of that $18.7 million in lottery revenues. And we added the $18.7 in lottery revenues to help with outreach through county veteran service officers, to help with campus, both at colleges and universities, having a resource center for veterans. We helped on housing and homelessness initiatives, and a program called the document recording fee. While it didn't increase this year, it has matured to the point that we've set aside $15 million for veterans housing and veterans homelessness initiatives going into the next biennium. The reason that that was so meaningful is that the senator, my counterpart, the chair of the Senate Veterans Emergency Preparedness Committee, Senator Brian Boquist, a Republican, and myself, a Democrat, worked together in common cause. We had a shared strategy. His committee and my committee have the unique distinction of being the only committees in the legislature that have equal membership, Democrats and Republicans. I have 8 people on my committee, 4 of us are Democrats, 4 of us are Republicans. We were able to put that package out with not a single no vote. It was a bipartisan approach. And some of that effort also went on emergency preparedness. We made some, I think, really big investments in new tools for local government struggling with the costs of being able to meet known requirements. And I think that this legislature actually talked about big things, was in the press a lot for some of the things that were more controversial, but a lot of those things actually didn't get passed the way that they were talked about in the press. And I'm grateful for having played a part.
Well, I have to say that I think the vets need that help quite often, especially today. And I know that, like, my father was the first one in his family to go to college because of the GI Bill.
That's right.
And I mean, it was a huge uplifting for a lot of families because people were able, that served during World War II, were able to go and get a good college education and go into professions that they never would have even dreamed of, I think, before that happened. You're
absolutely right. There's a great, there's 2 books I recommend on the subject. One is The Bonus Army, and the second one is Soldiers to Citizens. And it tells the story of how the failures of what happened after World War I, and really 4 million men that had fought in World War I, struggling to try to catch up and figure out what they were going to do through the Great Depression. Lessons were learned, and the GI Bill was really, quite frankly, an attempt to make sure that the 16 million men under arms that came back from the war were staggered into the workforce. The education piece was kind of seen as a side benefit, but no one knew how that investment in trade and community college and university training would transform the 1950s, 60s, and 70s in terms of economic development and growth. And it is still a lesson today that we're trying to figure out a way to make sure that every veteran that comes back in every military family has every possible advantage to be able to unlock their skills, their training for our benefit as well as for theirs, because they bring a lot to the table.
Well, it was interesting because after World War II, they were expecting a recession, and it didn't happen because they still were pumping money into the economy by the GI Bill and various other bills that came through. And so I think that's kind of a lesson that people should be paying attention to.
I agree.
That if you build infrastructure, and education is part of that, it has a benefit, and sometimes a very immediate benefit, to your economy.
Exactly. And in fact, one of the reasons we were so focused on trying to make sure the campus veteran service program was going, campus resource centers, was to ensure that we are what's seen as a veteran-friendly state, so that people will come with the GI Bill and the families with them, choose to invest in Oregon as we invest in them, and use that knowledge here. The other thing is that $15 million in a $80 billion budget doesn't necessarily look like a lot, but $15 million for veterans housing and homelessness can also be leveraged to help in certain areas where housing is a major force in the economy. We can ensure that it doesn't slow down or just stop. We can use particular projects to be able to keep the growth maybe slow, but at least steady. So there's a number of tools that we can use that I think will not only serve the veterans and military families as we should, but also have an economic benefit that not everybody focuses on.
Well, one of the other things, and you just kind of mentioned it briefly, is the transportation bill. Because Salem is going to get a direct benefit in that it looks like Chariots is going to be able to expand to weekend service, at least Saturday service, fairly soon, and do something a little bit more robust, which I think will help a lot of our congestion problems if we had a decent transportation system.
I think you're absolutely right. And one of the things that Representative Clem and myself have been trying to work on for really 3 years, I think him longer because he's been there, but we have been working together over the last 3 years, is to try to provide new tools for the Salem-Keizer Transit District to be able to offer consistent, robust service, weekends, evenings, and to the areas around to help take pressure off those focal points we know have congestion. And we anticipate it'll be another $9.5 million for transit, which will change the game. What not everybody focuses on in that conversation, though, is that 9.5 and the stability of routes that are for sure allows local governments and regional partners to be able to leverage feeder connections to those pickup and drop-off facilities, so that we actually believe in Polk County that we're going to be able to really completely overhaul the way in which people can move around Polk County as well, piggybacking off this, and long-term provide more riders for the Salem Kaiser Transit on a consistent basis. So it's a win-win. And the transportation package, again, is you've alluded to, is not only a good thing, it was a great thing. It provided needed investment in infrastructure. It increased transit statewide for Salem Kaiser Transit District. It really will help the Chariots folks. The Safe Routes to Schools program, I think, is an important initiative. I was a little disappointed in some of the funding mechanisms that it depends upon. There were some earlier negotiations that I was much more in favor of, but at the end of the day, the package that was passed by the legislature, I think, did keep faith with the intentions, and I think it's going to do a lot of good for our community.
Well, you're kind of known for being able to work with both parties, Republicans and Democrats. Yeah. And I think that's another thing that's very needed, that both parties need to be working toward getting things done, as opposed to posturing and so on. And so what was your experience like this session?
Well, number one, I just want to say thank you to two people that you wouldn't normally hear in the same sentence. Speaker Tina Kotek and Representative Sal Escobar. Speaker Tina Kotek gave me the opportunity to be speaker, or gave me the opportunity to be chairman of the House Veterans and Emergency Preparedness Committee. And Sal Escobar was the Republican vice chair of my committee. In the House, unlike the Senate, there's a Democratic and a Republican vice chair, but usually odd number of seats in a committee. We had 8. So effectively, Sal had 4 votes, and I had influence on 4 Democratic votes. Sal recognized, as I do, that there really isn't a partisan perspective on veteran services, on emergency management, on public safety, that you can, I guess, artificially create something, but at the end of the day, there's good policy and there's bad policy. So Sal and I worked together to make sure that we hammered out differences, and we did have some differences on some issues. It wasn't that we didn't have a no vote because there weren't differences of opinion. It was that we respected each other enough to call a timeout, bring people around the table as issues came up, form work groups, get the experts in the room, and figure out what was the fairest, most reasonable path forward. Sometimes we went Sal's way, sometimes we went our way. And I believe because we created that climate of give and take, and of we don't care who gets the credit, we don't care which party looks good in this, we just want to get the right solution, that we were able to do a lot of really important things. And one of them, we call it the sleeper bill, is something called Lend-Lease, House Bill 2687. Would not have been able to get that passed had the Republicans not supported us. It's a bill, $5 million put aside for purchase of equipment. The state will purchase equipment on a list of needs. We will sign it over, hand the receipt to organizations, governments, nonprofits that have a particular need of a rescue boat or an ambulance or a van or a radio set. We're going to put them in places that we know, because of seismic or tsunami risk, have higher than average threats. If the state needs it, we get it, use it, bring it back to them. They have to pay maintenance and upkeep. That's it. And at the end of their normal life cycle, they'll have the right of first refusal whether to buy the equipment or not. We win because after a major disaster, we don't have to wait for big Air Force or big Navy to get us equipment because we're putting it out there. They win because a lot of these small entities can't afford a capital purchase of the thing they know they need. And when they do, sometimes local tastes make things more expensive than they need to be. We can standardize the costs, standardize the maintenance, and I think it's going to be a pilot program that will be replicated across the state. We copied it from the feds. It's worked very well in the metro areas. Sal asked why we couldn't do it here. We asked why we couldn't do it here. And we were able to work together across the parties and get it done. So it was a very meaningful progress for me.
Well, we might have a demonstration of kind of emergency preparedness coming up here in a few weeks with the eclipse, because
Yes.
they're talking about anywhere is up to like 500,000 people showing up here in Oregon. And
We're planning on 1.5 million, actually.
Yeah. So this, I mean, roads are going to be congested.
Yes.
There's going to be a lot of services needed and like that. So that's, I know from talking to Polk County and Marion County that they don't know what to expect, but they are like, in my neighborhood here in Salem, they aren't picking up the garbage on the normal day because they're going to be one day delayed that week.
Right.
And so it kind of gives you an idea about what to expect maybe during, at least gives them a certain perspective about how are we going to handle these emergencies.
Exactly. The thing that excites me about the eclipse, and I must confess, I'm not a science guy, so I'm sure it's going to be very cool when it becomes dark when it's not supposed to. But the thing that really fascinates me is exactly what you're talking about. How local neighborhoods and governments work through this equation to make sure they minimize risk, and some of the conversations that will happen afterwards. Because it's going to be a large exercise. In the military, we call it a large muscle movement. It's not going to be perfect, but it's one of those things where it isn't in crisis. It's a situation where it's a good thing, but it will teach us some lessons, and it will reveal areas for us to be focusing on. And as a person who focuses on emergency preparedness a lot, I think it's going to be great because it will allow us to have some conversations that we've been trying to have, but there hasn't been a general awareness of the holes in the plan. And I think this is going to be great.
A little stress test.
A little bit of a stress test, that's right. Yeah.
And you kind of need those things periodically. So what are things that we're going to have to be facing here in Oregon coming up, say, in the next legislative session and going forward?
Excuse me. Yeah, I think there's two things that we're going to have to deal with. One is we're going to have to either come to terms with a continuation of cutting services and reducing expectations. And again, I'm not talking draconian cuts just for the sake of making a scene. I'm talking about there is a steady state cost of operations for the services that close to 4 million people soon will need. And we're either going to become more adept and more accepting of a reduction of expectations, which is an option, or we're going to figure out a way to build a tax and revenue structure that rewards hard work, rewards innovation, rewards small business, and still meets our requirements. The problem is sometimes folks, for many different reasons, want to argue that, well, any revenue package is simply more taxes and it's going after the rich or going after the job creators. And in some ways, a lot of rhetoric on many different sides focuses on the winners and the losers. I'm less concerned about the winners and losers in terms of political gain than finding models around the country of sustainable ways of paying for services we need so that economics can actually work. So for example, Ohio and Washington have some very interesting structures in terms of their revenue. This legislature, we came close to having a vote on what I thought was a responsible revenue package. First of all, it eliminated the corporate income tax. Second of all, it lowered the personal income tax in the bottom two, the 5% and the 7%, down to 4.5% and 6.5%. It set a cap at $3 million or above as far as what small business sales would be. So if you were $3 million or below, you would pay a grand total of $250 a year as your business taxes. 92% of companies in Oregon meet that level. And then the rest would be on a gross receipts, sales volume type measurement. But the nice part about the way in which the package was put forward was each individual sector of the economy was tailored into their specific needs. For example, a couple of years back there was a proposal to have a gross receipts tax that had a specific amount for all businesses over a certain level. That's not really as effective in many ways as recognizing that some sectors have a very small profit margin. Farmers, forestry, agriculture, big numbers. Tractors cost a lot of money.
Right.
But the profit is really small because in many ways, we're subject to global pricing. Retail, service sectors, different levels of potential profit. Manufacturing, different yet. So one of the lessons that I think the process, and I think there were like 25 different iterations of this, that again, Republicans, Democrats, business, labor, everybody was around the table and trying to figure out how to make this work. The Ohio model was passed by a Republican legislature, Republican governor. Washington, mostly a Democratic legislature and a Democratic governor. Both are sustainable, both are working, and in both states, small businesses have actually grown, not been hurt by their structures. So I think in the next 2 years, we have to come together around a consensus. And here's the deal. We have the ability to grow an economy at probably 6 to 7% over time. I don't think we're going to have 5 and 6 year percent growths anytime soon. So we have to come up with a way to both support the needs of a society that is in many ways a little older than it used to be, requires a little more help and support than it used to, and at the same time in an environment that's far more dynamic than it was when I was just getting out of high school. It's a global marketplace. So the question is, are we going to live within artificially constrained limits, or are we going to find a way to come to an Oregon solution that actually benefits small businesses, grows the economy, supports our services, and become an oasis for innovation and creativity? I think that's the right path, but I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, small businesses usually are the ones that are the ones doing so much hiring.
80% of the jobs over the last recovery have been through small business development.
So anything that I think helps them along,
All right.
and makes them competitive, because we were talking about healthcare, and I know in the past that's been quite a problem for a small business to attract good talent, because they can't compete with some of these benefits like healthcare for individuals and families.
It is, and one of the things we first established when I first got elected, and then we've been trying to figure out how to make it work, is a small business roundtable. We've done a number of 30 businesses in 30 days, and then 60 businesses in 60 days, and a number of different forums to try to figure out what is actually helpful versus not helpful for small business folks. And as we move forward, the Small Business Roundtable is going to become more important in both my campaign and then as I serve in the legislature, because we have to figure out a way to make sure that it is, number one, easy for somebody who comes up with an idea to take it to market. Number two, if you're a small business and you're hiring local employees, that we find a way to help you because of the investments you've decided to make. Meaning that figuring out a way to where companies that choose to, shall we say, outsource jobs are not always given the same benefits as those that are choosing what I think is the morally right thing to do, to invest back in their economy through hiring local folks and making an investment. So I'm absolutely committed to that. I serve on the Business and Labor Committee. I know that the chair shares those values, and I'm hoping that with some of our small business ideas, we had a couple this time that were primed. They just kind of ended up dying before we got them out of committee. But I think you're right. Small business development is the key to Oregon sustainability.
Well, Paul, I want to thank you for coming in today and sharing what happened in the legislative session.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you for watching City Beat, and come back next time.